When I first moved back to my small hometown after 15 years away, I thought I'd finally found peace. The property I bought was an old farmhouse on 3 acres right next to a fancy subdivision called Maple Grove Estates. That subdivision had an HOA with rules so strict they fined residents for leaving trash cans out for more than an hour. My house, however, sat just outside their borders. I wasn't part of their HOA, didn't pay their dues, and didn't have to follow their ridiculous rules. Or so I thought. My first interaction with them happened the week after I moved in. A woman in her late 50s, crisp polo shirt tucked into beige pants, strutted up my driveway like she owned the place. She didn't introduce herself, didn't smile, just jabbed a clipboard toward my truck parked in front of my barn. "You can't park it here," she said. "HOA regulations require all vehicles to be garaged or behind a privacy fence." I looked around. "You must be lost. This property isn't part of your HOA." She narrowed her eyes. "Everything on this side of the road is Maple Grove." "So, yes, it is." I showed her my deed right there on my phone. It clearly showed my property was outside the HOA boundary line. Her lips tightened. "Well, we'll see about that." Over the next week, letters started showing up in my mailbox. Not official mail, printed paper in plastic sleeves with the HOA's logo on top. Notice of violation, they read. My grass was too tall. My barn was unsightly. My fence not in compliance. Each one came with a threat of fines and a deadline to remedy. I called the HOA office. A man named Mark, the president, answered. He sounded smug. "If you live next to us, your property affects our community's image. We have the right to enforce certain standards." I told him he had no such right. He laughed. "You'll learn how things work around here." A few days later, I caught one of their board members snapping photos of my yard. I confronted him, told him to leave. He said he was documenting violations. I warned him again that he was trespassing. He didn't care. The final straw came one Saturday morning. I was working on the roof of my barn when 2 police cruisers pulled into my driveway. The officer stepped out and said they'd received a call about an uncooperative resident refusing HOA compliance. The lady who'd first come to my door stood behind them smirking, arms folded. I explained calmly that my property wasn't part of the HOA, showed the officer my deed again. He read it, looked at her, and frowned. "Ma'am, he's right. This address isn't listed under Maple Grove jurisdiction." Her face flushed red. "There must be a mistake. He's damaging our neighborhood's look." The officer told her to stop harassing me or risk being charged for filing false complaints. She stormed off, muttering something about calling the county. That's when I decided I'd had enough. These people had turned what should have been my peaceful homecoming into a petty war. I started researching Maple Grove's HOA records. Public filings, county maps, board rosters, property ownership. All open information if you know where to look. And that's when I found it. Maple Grove Estates didn't own the land under their clubhouse, pool, or even their front gate. It was leased property. The owner? A real estate investment trust whose assets were quietly being auctioned off because of debt. And one of those assets was scheduled to go up for sale the following month. I sat back, smiling for the first time in weeks. If they wanted to act like they owned me, maybe it was time to show them who really did. The next few weeks, I kept my head down and played along like nothing had happened. The HOA members probably thought they had scared me off. They still sent their silly letters and left printed notices on my gate, but I didn't respond. I wanted them calm and overconfident while I prepare my move. Every evening after work, I drove into town and met with the county property office, the auction clerk, and a local attorney who handled land transactions. When I told him what I discovered, that the HOA's most important facilities sat on leased land, he raised an eyebrow and said, "So you're thinking of buying it?" I smiled. "I'm not thinking. I'm doing it." He helped me set up a small company to make the purchase clean and quiet. I didn't want the HOA board catching wind of what was happening until it was done. The auction took place on a Thursday morning at the county courthouse. A few property developers showed up, but none of them seemed too interested in a small clubhouse lot attached to a suburban neighborhood. To them, it wasn't worth the hassle. When the clerk announced the starting bid, I lifted my card. No one else bid. In less than 5 minutes, the property was mine, well, technically owned by my company. I signed the paperwork, paid the fees, and walked out grinning like a kid on Christmas morning. That night, I drove by the Maple Grove front entrance. Their stone sign glowed under spotlights. Maple Grove Estates HOA, carved deep in marble. Behind it stood the gates, the community center, the pool, and the parking area. All of it, every square foot, now legally belonged to me. I didn't tell anyone for 2 days. I wanted to make sure all the paperwork cleared first. When the county recorded my ownership officially, I printed the deed and framed it. The next Saturday, the HOA had one of their big community improvement meetings at the clubhouse. Cars lined the street, people chatting with coffee cups and clipboards in hand. I waited until they were all inside before I pulled up in my truck. I walked straight through the doors, holding my new deed folder. The same woman who had called the cops on me stepped in front of me with that same fake smile. "Excuse me, sir, this meeting is for residents only." I smiled right back. "Oh, I'm aware. I just came to let everyone know the property you're standing on now belongs to me." The room went silent. I laid the deed down on the table in front of the HOA president, Mark. He picked it up, his face turning pale as he read it. The lawyer in him probably realized what it meant before anyone else did. "This can't be right," he stammered. "This land is part of our leased property I finished for him, which means the leaseholder had every right to sell it. And I bought it. So from now on, you'll be paying rent to me if you want to keep using your clubhouse, pool, or parking lot." The room erupted. Some shouted in disbelief, others demanded proof. I simply pointed at the official county stamp on the deed. "I'd also recommend keeping your members off my driveway from now on," I added calmly, "because the next time someone trespasses, it'll be me calling the cops." I left them there arguing, their voices rising behind me as I walked out. I couldn't stop smiling. For the first time in months, I felt in control. Over the next week, I received a flood of emails from the HOA board begging to meet. Apparently, their lease terms didn't automatically renew after ownership transfer. Without my approval, they couldn't legally operate any of their facilities. I ignored them at first, let them sweat. By day 5, their tone changed from arrogant to desperate. They offered to negotiate. I agreed to a meeting but held it at my farmhouse, not their clubhouse. When they arrived, they tried to act professional, but you could see the panic in their faces. Their lawyer did most of the talking, saying they needed cooperation for the good of the community. I told them I was more than willing to cooperate, under my own conditions. First, I said, "You'll send a written apology for every false violation notice and police call your board has issued to me. Second, you'll retract any HOA claims involving my property from public record. Third, you'll pay an annual rent for use of the clubhouse land." Mark clenched his jaw. "That's extortion." I laughed. "No, that's business." They left angry, refusing my terms. 2 weeks later, they learned how serious I was. I posted a notice on the clubhouse door: "Property closed for maintenance by owner." I chained off the parking lot and padlocked the gates. Overnight, their entire community center shut down. No pool parties, no meetings, no access to the gym. Members started complaining, demanding answers. Word spread quickly that their HOA had somehow lost its land. Soon, half the neighborhood wanted the board removed. A few even came by my house privately to apologize for how they'd treated me, saying they never realized how controlling the HOA had become. I listened but didn't say much. The real satisfaction wasn't just the ownership, it was watching the same people who'd looked down on me now scrambling to get permission to use their own facilities. Still, I wasn't done. Not yet. The revenge was satisfying, yes, but it wasn't complete, because I had one more surprise waiting that would leave the entire neighborhood speechless. And that moment came sooner than I expected. The following week, Maple Grove residents were buzzing. The clubhouse, pool, and gym were still closed, and the board was scrambling to explain the sudden shutdown. Rumors flew like wildfire. Some people thought the HOA had gone bankrupt, others whispered about lawsuits. I watched it all quietly from my porch, sipping coffee, letting their panic simmer. Then I scheduled a community meeting, but this time, the invitation came from me. I sent a letter to every household in Maple Grove, meeting regarding property use and community rules. Attendance mandatory. The landowner. By Monday afternoon, every single board member was sweating, clutching their paperwork, and wondering what I would do next. I stood at the front of the clubhouse with the deed in my hand. Their faces were pale, and they avoided looking at me directly. I began calmly. I'm sure you've all been wondering why your community facilities are closed. I'll be honest, it's because I now legally own the land. A few gasps echoed through the room. Everything here, clubhouse, pool, gym, parking lots, belongs to me. That means any use without my permission is trespassing. Mark, the HOA president, tried to interrupt. This is absurd. You can't just, I raise my hand. Let me finish. I've reviewed every rule, every lease, every violation you've ever sent me. And I've decided to give you a choice. You either follow my terms, or these facilities remain closed indefinitely. Their terms were strict and humiliating for them. I required a written apology for each false violation notice, a public announcement in the neighborhood newsletter admitting the HOA had no authority over my property, and an annual fee for continued use of any land I owned. On top of that, I demanded that the board personally oversee compliance with my conditions. The room fell silent. Then the woman who had called the cops on me months earlier, the first one to approach my property, tried to argue. You can't do this. We've run this community for years. I cut her off. You ran it because you thought you owned it. But now, reality has changed. I could see her jaw tighten, and I knew she realized she was trapped. The power had shifted entirely. The arrogance, the smirks, the sense of superiority, they were gone. Every complaint they had sent me, every time they tried to control my life, came crashing down. Then came my final move. I called in a local contractor and had the entire community center's signage replaced to read, "Private property, owners control." I didn't destroy anything. I simply made it clear to every resident that their HOA no longer had authority. They were stunned when neighbors began asking questions. Half the residents came to me privately, worried about fines they'd been paying in meetings they'd attended under false pretenses. I reassured them they were safe as long as they followed the new rules, but the board was now under my oversight. Mark and the board tried one last time to fight me in court, claiming the sale was illegal. That backfired spectacularly. The judge reviewed my paperwork and the auction details, then asked why the HOA hadn't paid attention to their lease terms. The board had no leg to stand on. Within a month, they were forced to comply or face personal liability. As for the original woman, she never came near my property again. She tried to send threatening emails, which I forwarded to her lawyer and warned her that harassment could result in criminal charges. It was satisfying to see her once confident demeanor reduced to anxiety and resentment. By the end of the year, I had quietly earned a small income from leasing back parts of the property they wanted to use and gained respect, or at least cautious acknowledgement from a neighborhood. The HOA's power was neutralized completely. I still remember the first Saturday I sat on my porch watching the sunset over the farmland I'd bought 15 years too late to enjoy at first. The same people who thought they could intimidate me now waved politely as they passed, careful to stay on their side of the driveway. It wasn't just about money or land. It was about principle, about proving that arrogance and bullying only last as long as the victim allows it. And as I closed my laptop that evening, I smiled, thinking about the irony. The people who called the cops on me now had to ask me for permission to exist on my land. They thought they had control, but the lesson was clear. Underestimate the quiet ones, and they might just own everything you thought was yours. The victory wasn't loud or messy, but it was complete. The HOA never harassed me again, and Maple Grove Estates finally learned that true authority comes with deeds, not ego.